So when you're ready to export your character animation to Unreal, normally you're going to see your rig, you'll have everything, but we're just going to be dealing with the geometry. So the first thing we want to do is go to Show, None, Show Polygons. That way we're just dealing with what we're going to be exporting. In this case, I'm not going to smooth him off. I'll show you an example here about what tessellation or smoothing is. So this is easier to see on a cube. So you can see we've got one polygon for each side, and you may see tessellation in your character object that you're exporting. And what you want to do is make sure that you have that smooth before you take it into Unreal. And if I just hit 3, that's not really smooth. It's just showing me a viewport version of what it would be if I actually created geometry. So I'm going to hit 1 and then go up to Mesh, Smooth, and open up my dialog box. And this divisions level is exponential. So you really want to be careful with it because it's going to create a lot of data. So if I smooth this now, you'll notice that for this polygon, I now have 4 polygons. And if I do that again, Mesh, Smooth, crank this up to 2, smooth it, you can see I now have 16 polygons for each polygon. And the nice thing is that it gets smoother and smoother the more you do it. But again, it's going to create a lot more data that you're going to have to move around. So if your character is not that close to your camera, you don't need to smooth it off that much. You may not have to do it at all, depending on how it's modeled. And in this case, I'm not going to smooth him. So the first thing we need to do is basically triangulate him and make sure that his geometry is in one object. And the way that you do that is you go up to Mesh and you hit Triangulate, and then it'll go through and cook. And now you can see that there's actually triangles for every single one. And then the next thing you want to do is make sure everything is selected that you want to export. Hold down Shift, and you want to combine it. So if you go to Mesh, Combine, then he'll become one basic, giant chunk of geometry, which is what we want. And this is really important. At this point, you should probably do it when you first start. I didn't do it, but at some point, you need to make sure that you go to File, Save Scene As, and then iterate whatever version, because all of this is destructive. So I'm going to say, like, this is 19. I'm going to make this export version 1, because if you accidentally save over your old file, it's going to mess everything up. And if somebody's animating with it, or you need to go back in and do something, you're not going to be happy. So make sure that you save off an iteration that you know is destructive. That way you can always go back to your other. If you miss a step or something that goes wrong, you can always go back to your original. So the nice thing is now I have one basic chunk of geometry, and I want to make sure that I blow away all my references. So you go to File, Reference Editor, and for instance, this guy right here is being referenced into this scene, and I don't want to do that. So I can right-click that, go to File, Import Object from Reference. And what that's going to do is you can see that reference now disappears. He's still in the scene, but it's no longer referencing an external file. So we're good to go. The other, last thing you want to make sure that you do is middle mouse button, hold and drag, and make sure that he's in the root. So if he's in any kind of a hierarchy, sometimes it just messes things up. It's just good to be on the safe side, just to make sure that he's in the root of the scene. And then finally, what we want to do is bake his animation for each vertex. So we can come over, go to animation, key, and then go down to bake simulation, and then open up that dialog box. Because there's a couple important things in here. We want to just do the time slider. Your beginning and end frames should already be set. If they're not, just make sure, like for instance, this one's 1098 by 11 something. And then we want a new layer. If this is set to base animation, you want to click on new layer, and then you're going to go to clear animation on this drop down. Everything else can just be default. Then that'll bake. Then it'll go through each key and make a key for every single frame. Sometimes that can take a while, again, depending on how big your model is. So now you can see I've got a keyframe on every single frame, and he is ready to be exported. So I can go to make sure that, again, he's the only thing that's selected. Cache, Alembic cache, and then you want to say export selection to Alembic, and that'll open up this dialog box. Again, we're going to do the cache range to the time slider. It automatically propagates from 1098 to 1180, and then we want to make sure UV right, color sets, right face sets, and whole frame geo is on, and the file format is HDF5. So once we have that, we can export selection. It's asking us where we want to dump it. You can put it into the Unreal folder, but it's up to you. You can always just go in and export it from anywhere. Or, I mean, import it from anywhere. It doesn't matter where it sits, but it's easier usually just to put it in the shot. So I'm going to iterate this one to 07. Again, these options should all be what you just set, the time frame, and then what your advanced options are. And then make sure that you enter. It'll go through, and you can see each frame it's ticking through and writing data out. And what the Alembic basically is doing is it's looking at every single vertice at every single frame and writing data for that. And again, they can be kind of big, but the nice thing is you get exactly what is in Maya. If you know, no matter what your rig looks like, no matter what's going on with your blend shapes, you get the final result to be one-to-one. Then when it's done, you can come over to Unreal, and this is shot 19. So navigate over to where your data is, and you can see I've pulled a couple of these in here, but you right click and then go to import, and then right now my path isn't automatically set to where these things are or what this shot is, so you can right click on any of these. Oops, hit cancel. You can right click on any of these that's in that shot, and it will say, well, take it back, you can't click on any of them. As long as you get a right click and a menu comes up, you can say show an explorer, and then that'll pop up a new window that'll actually show you where your path is on your hard drive. You can copy that. Now you can go to import and then paste that path in there. That way you're looking at the right stuff. And we just did 07, so we'll hit open. And again, this can take quite a while depending on how big your data set is. So if that doesn't pop up like in 30 seconds, just go have lunch or do something else for a while and let it cook, because I've had that take quite a while. And the first thing you're going to see is more than likely this import type will be set to static mesh. We don't want that. So go to this drop down menu, go to geometry cache. That way you'll be looking at all the things you actually need to bring in. Sometimes skip empty frames has worked, but I found it best just to go ahead and put your frame range in there. So come back over to mine and make sure I get mine. It's 1098, got it. You want flattened tracks to be on. Everything else can be pretty much default. You can turn on the create materials unless, for instance, this character is in a lot of different scenes and the materials will set up once, but it's kind of up to you. If you create materials every time, you're going to have to reassign them. So the first time might be good. The other thing is that this will probably be set to Maya. And what we need to do is actually turn 90 degrees on the rotation on X, because that way when we pull them in, it'll be automatically in the right place. If it's not, we can always do it later, but I just find it easier to do it on the import dialog. So we can hit import. Again, that can go pretty quick. Or if it just hangs there for a little while, you might, let it cook. If you're working off of a network, it can be slow. I recommend pulling your files somewhere locally and then pulling them in, because then when you're writing or reading from them, you're getting a fast result. So now that he's done, we can pull him in, and I'm not going to see anything, and that's because we need to zero this out. So we come back up to your location. You can see this is where the location is, and we just hit this little yellow back button. That should zero him out, and then he'll be in the right place. He doesn't have any materials on him right now, so I'm going to go ahead and assign his materials. I can't remember which is which here. Yeah, that's his head, and that's his body. Very good. Now we need to get him moving around. If you don't have a sequence already in your shot, you can go up to Cinematics, Add Level Sequence, and I actually do have one for this shot, but I'm going to go through it again anyway. We go to shot 19, and you can see I've got shot 19 SEQ, and so I'm going to make this shot 19 version 2 SEQ. And it's good to name them SEQ at the end. That way you can always find it if you need to search around. And there'll be nothing in this right now unless you have already set up your camera. And we're going to grab this guy, pull him into the sequence. But we can slide the time slider around, but nothing happens. And that's because we have to add his geometry cache. So if you go to track, and then you want to go to geometry cache. There's also geometry cache component, but you don't want that. You just want the geometry cache. And wherever your time slider is on your range is when it's going to pull that geometry cache in. Again, if it's down here and it pulls the geometry cache, it's no big deal. You can just slide it around like a video clip. So now he's moving around, and he's got his materials on. So that's about it. You want to make sure you save your sequence, and then you can move on to rendering.